Women for Peace, Part 3, by Sanderson Beck. Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma. The true measure of justice of a system is the amount of protection it guarantees to the weakest. Where there is no justice, there can be no peace. Aung San Suu Kyi, In Quest of Democracy. Aung San Suu Kyi was born in Rangoon on June 19, 1945. Her father, Aung San, who led the independence revolution and was a national hero, was assassinated on July 19, 1947. Her mother, Khin Kyi, was ambassador to India 1960-67, and Suu Kyi was influenced by the nonviolent philosophy of Gandhi. She earned a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford University in 1967, and she worked for the United Nations Secretariat in New York from 1969 to 1971. While working as a research officer in the Foreign Ministry of Bhutan in 1972, Suu Kyi married Michael Aris, a scholar of Tibetan culture. She was working on her doctoral dissertation at Oxford on Burmese literature in March 1988 when she learned that her mother had a stroke. Suu Kyi immediately went back to Rangoon to take care of her and was later joined by her British husband and their 2 sons. On July 23rd, General Ne Win, who had ruled Burma as a one-party state since 1962, announced his retirement and proposed a referendum on whether to have a one-party or multi-party system. The Central Committee of the Burma Socialist Program Party, BSPP, elected new leaders who decided not to have the referendum. Student demonstrations led to some arrests, curfews, and declaration of martial law on August 3rd as 10,000 people gathered. 5 days later, on 8/8/88 at 8:08 a.m., the pro-democracy movement was founded, and a general strike began with tens of thousands demonstrating in Rangoon. On August 15th, Aung San Suu Kyi proposed the People's Consultative Committee to act as an intermediary between the students and the government. 11 days later, she spoke to a rally of 500,000 people outside the Shwedagon Pagoda, calling for free and fair elections as soon as possible. On September 12th, she, Tin Yu, and Aung Ji suggested an interim government. 6 days later, army officers took over the government under the State Law and Order Restoration Council, SLORC. On September 24th, Aung San Suu Kyi, Tin Yu, and Aung Ji formed the National League for Democracy, NLD, with Suu Kyi as General Secretary, as mass arrests and summary executions of pro-democracy activists occurred throughout Burma. The BSPP became the National Unity Party, NUP, and by threatening punishment and dismissal brought an end to the general strike on October 3rd. Aung San Suu Kyi sent 2 letters to Amnesty International, complaining that on October 15th, more than 600 men had been arrested in Rangoon while sitting at tea shops or eating stalls. Aung San Suu Kyi traveled throughout Burma for 7 months and spoke to large crowds in more than 100 places. Aung San's widow, Suu Kyi's mother, Khin Kyi, died on September 27th, and hundreds of thousands attended the funeral in Rangoon. Later, in January 1989, Aung San Suu Kyi's tour was disrupted by the military, and 34 NLD workers were arrested. In February, she criticized the human rights violations and the resumption of Japanese aid. In April, Captain Myint Oo threatened to kill Aung San Suu Kyi in Donabu. 6 soldiers jumped out of a jeep and pointed their guns at her. She calmly waved away her supporters and kept walking down the road. When the Working People's Daily launched fierce attacks on the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi in June, she began criticizing Ne Win openly at mass rallies in Rangoon. She announced that she would lead a march on Martyrs' Day, July 19th. But 11 trucks with troops were stationed outside her house, and thousands of soldiers patrolled the streets of Rangoon to prevent the NLD from marching. The next day, SLORC put Aung San Suu Kyi and Tinu under house arrest, while scores of NLD workers were jailed across Burma. Aung San Suu Kyi asked to be held in prison with the other activists. She fasted on water for 12 days until she was assured that they would not be tortured. In December 1989, 100 political parties announced their intention to participate in the May 1990 elections. Aung San Suu Kyi's candidacy was challenged in January for her alleged connections with insurgent groups, and the Elections Commission barred her. In the election on May 27, 1990, the people of Burma elected the National League for Democracy, NLD, to 392 of the 485 seats contested. However, SLORC refused to transfer power, and Aung San Suu Kyi remained under house arrest for 6 years until July 1995. She did not even leave the country to accept the 1991 Nobel Peace Prize because she would not have been allowed back into Myanmar, the name given to Burma by the military authorities in 1989. She had the prize money put in a trust for the health and education of the Burmese people. Aung San Suu Kyi has written about the need for democracy, nonviolence, and national unity. She countered criticisms that democracy is not Burmese. In Quest for Democracy, she described the 10 Buddhist duties of kings, which are liberality, morality, generosity or self-sacrifice, integrity, kindness or courage, austerity or self-discipline, non-anger, non-violence, patience, and not opposing the will of the people. She argued that these Buddhist values and principles of accountability were more likely to produce democracy, respect for public opinion, and just laws than a ruling class that does not honor the will of the people. In Freedom from Fear, Aung San Suu Kyi suggested that fear corrupts more than power. It is not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it, and fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it. She wrote that the Burmese were aware of 4 kinds of corruption. These are desire, from bribes or for one's friends, doing wrong from ill will toward enemies, committing errors from ignorance, and fear, which she believed was the root cause of the other 3. She noted that public dissatisfaction with economic hardship was the primary motive of the democracy movement in Burma since 1988. She suggested that one must have determination to persevere in the struggle and make sacrifices, that saints are sinners who keep on trying, and that the free are the oppressed who continue to work for a free society. She agreed with her father, who, though he founded Burma's National Army, believed that army officers should stay out of politics. On August 14, 1994, the United Nations representative Jihan Rahim, U.S. Congressman Bill Richardson, and New York Times reporter Philip Shannon were allowed to interview Aung San Suu Kyi, and the following month she met with 2 SLORC generals. She was depicted in John Boorman's film Beyond Rangoon in 1995. Aung San Suu Kyi was released from detention on July 11, 1995. The next day, she asked international businesses not to invest in Burma until democracy was restored. She also started a tourist boycott. In October, the NLD reappointed her general secretary despite a SLORC ban, and she asked any organization working with the regime in Burma also to consult with the NLD. In 1996, the Ministry of Information conducted a propaganda campaign against Aung San Suu Kyi by having the state media portray her as an untrustworthy female, a prostitute of her body and the nation, and that her husband Michael Eris was manipulating her like a puppet at the behest of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Slork accused Aung San Suu Kyi of receiving $82,000 from the United States for her personal use, while the U.S. was providing $2.5 million through the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, and the International Rescue Committee. A cult was developing that suggested she is an archetypal lady and a powerful spirit, not of democracy, and she was portrayed by the media as an un-Buddhist animist. On Human Rights Day, December 10, 1997, Aung San Suu Kyi asked why the government found it necessary to put their people in jail if they do not have the support of the Burmese people. In May 1998, Aung San Suu Kyi and the NLD formed the Committee Representing People's Parliament, CRPP, based on those elected in May 1990. However, an effort was made to divide the NLD, as 25 members criticized her for this. The NLD demanded that the elected government be seated by August 1998. In July and August 1998, the army blocked her car at a bridge twice to keep her from leaving Rangoon, even though she spent several days in the car. Burma suffers from severe ethnic conflicts, but Aung San Suu Kyi believes that democratic institutions could provide the proper means of conflict resolution. One does not need recourse to violence in order to rebel against tyranny and oppression, as long as human rights are protected by the rule of law. Her husband had been diagnosed with prostate cancer in 1997, but he was not even allowed a visa so that he could visit her, and he died in March 1999. Police stopped her car from leaving Rangoon on August 24, 2000, and a week later 200 riot police forced the convoy to return to the capital. The next day, police raided her headquarters, seized documents, and arrested several members of the party. On December 23, 2000, Aung San Suu Kyi and other party leaders were detained in their homes. The next month, the State Peace and Development Council, SPDC, was persuaded by the Malaysian Prime Minister Datuk Seri Dr. Mahathir Mohamad to open a dialogue with Aung San Suu Kyi. In January 2001, NLD Chairman Tin Yu and 84 other members were released from custody, and Suu Kyi hoped that her talks with the SPDC would be productive. That month, the military stopped the outrageous propaganda campaign against her in the state-run media. In April, more than 30 U.S. senators warned President George W. Bush not to lift the sanctions against the Myanmar regime. Secret negotiations by the United Nations led to her release in May 2002. 8 other members of the NLD were also let go. But according to Amnesty International, more than 1,500 others were still in Burmese jails. In 2003, Aung San Suu Kyi still would not leave Myanmar to accept awards because she would not be allowed to return. In March, she was interviewed by the BBC, and she said that she did not look upon the generals as the enemy, but that she wanted to work together for a settlement that would be beneficial to everyone, including the military. She was so popular that it was difficult for the regime to arrest her in Rangoon. However, in May 2003, they got 300 members of the Union Solidarity and Development Association, USDA, to attack her caravan in the country near Mandalay. 3 weeks later, some of her supporters were killed when the army fired at her vehicle. She remained with her supporters, but then was taken away by her driver. Later, they were arrested and sent to Insein prison. The government claimed that she was under protective custody. After undergoing surgery in September, she was moved back to house arrest. Large banks helped the Myanmar regime get around the tough sanctions imposed by the United States that went into effect in August 2003. International protests of her detention were held in June 2004, and the rock band U2 dedicated 2 songs to her. In November 2005, the NLD confirmed that her house arrest had been extended for another year, and in response, the United States raised the issue in the UN Security Council. Medea Benjamin and Code Pink. The more we understand, appreciate, and humanize people we are taught to see as enemies, the harder it is for our government to persuade us to fight them. The struggle to end war will be the culmination of a global movement that rejects violence on the part of individuals, terrorist groups, and nation-states. Medea Benjamin, 2005. Medea Benjamin worked for 10 years as an economist and nutritionist in Latin America and Africa for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Health Organization, and the Swedish International Development Agency. After being a senior analyst for Food First in San Francisco, she founded Global Exchange in 1988. 10 years later, the Washington Post credited this organization with putting labor rights on the human rights agenda. Global Exchange helped to organize large protests against the World Trade Organization, WTO, meeting at Seattle in December 1999. Benjamin was criticized by some activists for her statement that it was correct for Seattle police to arrest anarchists who destroyed property. Benjamin was instrumental in coordinating the anti-sweatshop campaigns that have sprung up on college campuses, and she has led the effort to get corporations such as Nike and The Gap to establish ethical codes of conduct. In 1999, her work helped expose the indentured servitude of garment workers in Saipan that led to a $1 billion lawsuit against 17 retailers. She has also promoted worker rights in China, the liberation of Indonesia from the tyranny of General Suharto, and self-determination for East Timor. Benjamin supported the peace process between the Zapatistas and the Mexican government and has struggled to get the embargoes against Cuba and Iraq lifted. In 2000, Medea Benjamin was the Green Party candidate for the U.S. Senate in California. She has written and edited books to help link citizens to the first and third worlds, and she wrote a biography of Brazil's first poor and black woman senator, Benedita da Silva. Code Pink, Women for Peace, was founded by Medea Benjamin, Jody Evans, Starhawk, Diane Wilson, and about 100 other women on November 17, 2002, in order to protest the impending invasion of Iraq by the George W. Bush administration. They marched through the streets of Washington and began a vigil in front of the White House that lasted 4 months. Their vigil was supported by Greenpeace, WILPF, WAND, Public Citizen, NOW, Women for Women International, Neighbors for Peace and Justice, and others. In September 2002, when Donald Rumsfeld was testifying at a House Armed Services Committee hearing, Benjamin and Diane Wilson chanted, "Inspections, not war," and were removed. A month later, Wilson scaled the fence at the White House and was arrested by the Secret Service. She was banned from Washington for 1 year. Wilson and 2 other protesters were arrested in Austin when the Texas legislature was passing a resolution supporting the war. In February 2003, Benjamin and 11 other women visited Baghdad to assess the likely impact of war. and they concluded that the UN inspections to remove weapons were working. On International Women's Day, March 8th, more than 10,000 people marched in Washington, and about 24 women were arrested for protesting the imminent war. By the end of 2003, there were more than 100 Code Pink chapters which act autonomously. Code Pink Central sends out weekly Code Pink alerts to more than 30,000 people. Code Pink activists have presented themselves in pink slips, women's lingerie, to warn politicians and other public figures such as Fox News' Bill O'Reilly and FCC Director Michael Powell that the people may fire them from their jobs. In 2004, Medea Benjamin was dragged off the floor of the Democratic National Convention in handcuffs for having displayed a banner which read, "End the occupation, bring the troops home now." At the Republican convention, she was also removed, and her sign read, "Pro-life, stop the killing in Iraq." Benjamin was also ejected from Bush's second inaugural ceremony. After the destruction of Fallujah in November 2004, Code Pink helped Global Exchange and Families for Peace to raise $600,000 in humanitarian relief for the refugees from Fallujah. In 2005, Benjamin traveled to Iraq with military families who had lost loved ones in the war, and she organized the Occupation Watch Center to coordinate humanitarian aid to Iraqis. To protest the closing of the Salinas Library in California because of lack of funding, Code Pink organized a 24-hour read-in in April 2005. That month, women unfurled banners and spoke out at the congressional hearing for UN Ambassador nominee John Bolton. In the book, Stop the Next War Now, Effective Responses to Violence and Terrorism, which she edited with Jody Evans, Benjamin recommends the following 10 actions for peace. 1. Educate yourself on the issues. 2. Demand truthful media. 3. Communicate. 4. Hold your leaders accountable. 5. Help the United States kick our oil addiction. 6. Build the peace movement. 7. Support members of the military who are speaking out. 8. Protect our civil liberties and oppose the backlash against immigrants. 9. Support the creation of a Department of Peace. 10. Teach peace. If men through their aggression, power urges, and rigid stubbornness have caused war after war, then women, through their love, nurturing, and flexibility, can help us to learn how to prevent wars in order to save our civilization. Western civilization in the 20th century became pathologically destructive, endangering all life. Much therapy and healing is needed to cure the disease of masculine militarism. Feminist nonviolence is clearly the remedy recommended by the greatest of the peacemakers. Our society as a whole, and each person individually, must learn to revere the loving, sensitive, caring, empathetic qualities of our being. Women are excellent teachers of peace in this process that will evolve into a balanced, healthy, integrated, and just society. Feminism has enabled women to take their rightful place in the anti-nuclear movement, thus strengthening the power and health of the peace movement. The empowerment of women is exemplified in the anti-nuclear movement by 3 of its most important voices, Helen Caldicott, Petra Kelly, and Randall Forsberg, as can be seen in the next chapter.